Hello everyone. Today we are going to paint this cute red robin. And I'm really excited about painting this robin because I moved a couple of years ago to Idaho and I see red robins here where I did not see them in California. And I grew up in Michigan where the red robin was the first sign of spring, and so we would always see them early spring, and we would know that the warmer weather was coming. So today is going to be another fun, very simple project, and I'm going to show you my supply list real quick. First of all, I'm going to trace this, as I always do, onto my paper, and to do that, I use graphite paper, waxless. I put it face down, I put the image over it, and then I use a stylus to trace the basic parts of the image, and you don't have to get every single detail. So if you don't know how to trace, I didn't when I first started painting. I have a tracing tutorial, which I'll link in the description, that you can go to and watch if you need more detailed instructions. So as far as my supply list goes, first of all, I have my paints, and this is a Japanese brand I've been using called Kurete Gansai Tombi from Japan. Beautiful colors. There's the sap green. There's this cad red. This is just black and a gray, which I'm going to use for his wings and top of his head and feathers. And then this is the names are on the back, Raw Umber Deep, which is a very dark brown, which I'll be using for the tree trunk. And in addition, I always use these two brushes. This is a small project again. The pink one is a number 2, and the green one is a number 5, and these are round brushes, and they're pretty small because this is a small project. Then the paper I'm going to use, I'm going to try this as a new one that I just got. Got it on Amazon, and it says that it is 100% pure cotton, and it's cold pressed, and it's 300 GSM or 140 pounds, which is a really great weight. And so I like this book because they have different covers. This is a nice cover, but also I like that it's spiral bound and that it has this scored edge, so you can tear this paper out and get a nice clean edge on it. Sometimes I use a paper trimmer to make it exactly how I want it also. And the weight is really nice, and so I'm not going to use the first page again. When I start a new book, I like to turn into the second page and use the first one as like a title page. So I'm going to go ahead and trace that, and I'll show you that in a minute when it's finished tracing. I like to use a ceramic palette for mixing. I have a spray bottle, so I'll spray my paints, and I will get them wet so that they are ready for me to use. And then to finish, I like to use this white rollerball pen. This is, I think you can get these on Amazon too. Uniball is the brand. And then I really like these micron pens. I use the 0.5 size for outlining at the end, and that's called watercolor sketching. It was a really easy way to just kind of give a lot more definition to your finished projects. And then also you can sign it with a smaller permanent ink pen. Just make sure they're permanent ink. You don't have to get that exact same one. And that kind of goes with everything that I'm showing you. You can use your own paints, your own colors, your own paper. It really doesn't matter exactly to get the things that I'm using. You can use whatever you have on hand. It's good to have, I tore one of the pages out of the back because it's good to have an extra piece of paper of the same kind of paper you're working on, so you can test your colors on the scrap paper before you use it on your project. And then, of course, you need to have a lot of paper towels on hand for blotting, and you need to have some water jars. I like to have 3, and it's good when you're switching colors to make sure that you have really clean water to do that. Okay, so that is the end of my supply list, and I'm going to get busy now and trace, and then I will be right back. Okay, so I'm done tracing. You can see that this is just a very basic outline. I didn't put any of the details in, just the basic outline, which is really all you need, especially when you're using watercolors. So I'm going to start, a good rule of thumb is always to start with the very lightest colors, and because most of these colors are kind of dark on this bird, I'm going to take this red and I'm just going to dilute it a really lot with water. And you usually have to add like a lot more water than you think, just a very little bit of paint. And I usually take it down a couple of notches here on the palette. And then I test it, see what it looks like. And it's still a little bit too dark for what I want. I want to make it very, very light. Okay, this should work. So I'm actually going to paint this entire section of this bird. And I'm going to leave a little bit of white around his eye. In other words, I'm not going to paint around his eye because I'm going to leave some white so that it's going to kind of define his eye. And again, no need for perfection with watercolor, just kind of go for it and paint. And you can see this is a very light, almost like a peach. And you're going to want a warm red for this project. Okay, so now that I've got that pretty much filled in, the key next is to just let this dry. And once it's really dry, I'm going to go back in with some darker reds. What I'm going to do next is just switch to the green, and I'm going to paint the leaves. I'm going to take that sap green and again add some water. I like this green. It's a very kind of a nice bright spring green. And for this, again, I'm just going to water it down. I'm going to make it really watery because I want this to be, I want some of the leaves to be kind of lighter green. I want it even lighter than that. There we go. I want some of the leaves to be very lighter green and some to be darker. So what I'm going to do first is just paint all of the leaves this lighter green. And then again, I'll go back over it with a darker green. So this is, I like to just work on other parts of my project when I'm waiting for part of it to dry, but sometimes you can't do that. You know, you just have to take a break, go and get a cup of tea or something. So now I'm going to let this just sit also. Rinse my brush really good. And now I'm going to go in to the brown, that dark brown, and I'm going to paint the tree branch. And this, I don't care so much about it being very light because the entire branch is pretty dark. But again, can test it. I think that's a good color. And the nice thing about these round brushes, especially the small ones, is that you can just use the very tip, like I'm doing here, and you can get a very fine line. It's just a very light touch. And you don't have to necessarily switch to a smaller brush. I like to use the small brushes for the detail work. And the whole thing about watercolor is that it's just moving water around really with the paint. And just kind of letting it do what it's going to do. That's why I think it's so therapeutic, because there's no right or wrong way. And if you paint something and you don't like it, I like to keep everything I do because I like to see my progress, but you don't have to. You can just get rid of it if you don't like it. See how I'm just painting right over the feet, because I'm going to go back in and I'm going to use a black pen for his feet. I'm not going to bother trying to paint that small detail. All right, so now I am going to go back in with some darker brown in a minute. But what I'm going to do first is go back to the bird. And I'm going to use, this time, a much darker color. And just by layering this, it's going to make it darker, even if I were to use the same color. And so another good thing to do is to rinse your brush and go in with just water. And if you have a higher cotton paper like what I'm using, it'll take longer to dry, so you can go in and do this when it's totally dry. Sometimes it's hard to blend, so I like to go in just when it's still, you know, just kind of carry that hard edge out a little bit. And I'll make this part a little bit darker. It kind of has a triangular shape with the color on the red. And this top part, I'm going to add some gray, so I'm not too worried about it being a little bit sharper at the top. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to the green, and I'm going to make a couple of these leaves darker. And again, if you get too much water, just blot. And the thing is, too, that a lot of times things look different when they're wet versus dry. Okay, now I'm going to take this lighter gray, and I'm going to start with this lighter gray for his wings, because I want some of it to be really light gray like this. And again, I'm going to add a little more water, and I'm just going to paint all of his wings this color first. Okay, so now I am going to go and just add a little bit more red, this darker red color, to layer again on this part of the bird. And you can always lift some of the color off. That's another thing. If you get too much water and too much color, you can always use your brush to just kind of lift it off. Like right here, I have a little bit too much water. And I'm going to go ahead and I think I'm actually going to take some orange. This is cadmium orange. And I'm going to just add just a touch of that into this part of his body. Because for one thing, I think I would like a little more contrast. But I also like the idea of just having a bit more orange in this red because it's looking kind of pink to me. So this is just to show you that, you know, you can come in and change things even in the middle of a project. And, you know, if things aren't going the way that you thought or you want it to be a little bit different, you can always come in and change it up. Okay. And you can just, like I said, blend together, lifting if you have too much water. Might want this to be a little lighter. By lifting, blotting my brush, and then lifting. And that's how you get, you know, a nice layered look. Okay, so now I am going to take some of this black and this is very dark black. So again, I'm gonna dilute it out with a lot of water. My palette. Test it out. And I'll probably have to do this in a few more layers too. And now I'm just going to do a little bit of layering over this area. Just adding some contrast. And then for his beak, I'm going to use my other brush because that is a very fine detail. And his eye. And I am going to go back in here also and add some white to his eye and the wings with the rollerball pen. And I think maybe I will do his feet, his claws. Now I'm rinsing my brush really well, and I'm just going to go back in here now and kind of fill in some of these areas now that I have the beak done. I'm going to add a little more color to this area. And I just dropped a little extra water there by accident, so you can always lift it, blot, lift it, blot when that happens. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and take a little more green, make this a little bit darker. At this point, I would just go in and just add a little bit darker to all the different colors. And I'm going to take a little of this and add it to the tree just for a little bit more depth. It's black. and again to his wing. And it's good to use the little tiny brush for this kind of work, detail work. Okay, so I am pretty happy with this. And the last step is just kind of see if there's anything else you want blended. You know, any harsh edges that maybe you want to take a little water and just blend it. And this is another thing when you use the a little bit more expensive paper, although this paper I'm using was not very expensive. And I'm pretty happy with it. This is the first time I've used it. It's it has a good feel when I'm working with it with the water. Okay. Okay, so then the last step, I will take my fine tip black pen, permanent ink, and it's the 05 size, and make sure that everything is really, really dry. You don't want to start doing this kind of work when there's any wetness on your image because it could smear. So I like to go ahead and just kind of start to sketch in an outline. And what I feel like this makes it look like is like I had already sketched this like with a pen and ink and then gone and done the watercolor after. And this is just adding more detail. And especially when you're a very beginner watercolorist, this works well to kind of fill in any areas with maybe didn't turn out exactly the way that you had hoped. You don't have to worry as much about blending, and it really, I feel like it adds a lot. And then I'm going to go over these claws just a little bit more to define them with the darker. Same thing with the beak. And the eye. And when you're doing this with the marker, you don't really want to make like a super heavy line. You just want to keep it very light. A very light touch. Just going to kind of draw in a few feathers here. And now if you see any areas that have pencil lines that maybe you don't want there, you could erase them if you want to, but I tend to not worry too much about that because I feel like the black pen really does camouflage any of those areas. Okay, so then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that white pen, the Mitsubishi Rollerball, and it's a uniball pen, and I usually prime it on some scrap paper also to make sure it's flowing well. And this pen I really like the best out of any of the pens that I've tried, the white pens. Some of them seem to dry up. This one seems to last. It's been lasting pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and just add a little white dot to the center of his eye. And I wanted to add a few embellishments to his wing. Sometimes, especially if you're going over a darker color, you have to add in, you have to go over it again. Because the darker color will sometimes bleed through. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. I don't really want to add a lot of extra white. Just wanted a few little bits of contrast. And the last thing that you want to do for sure is sign your work. And to sign my work, I like to use a very small, very fine tip micron pen. This is a 02 or even smaller sometimes. And I just use my initials. And I just do it very, very lightly. And I like to put the date so I can always keep track of when I did what project. So there you go. That is the finished project. And I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. And please follow me on YouTube. I would appreciate that. And I would love to see your work also. Have a great day.
Hey, before you go, I just want to say something really important. If you're a woman who has done everything for everyone else for so many years, and you're really ready for something that's just for you, and you would love to learn how to watercolor paint, but maybe you think you're not creative, or you just don't have talent, or maybe you feel like you're just not going to measure up to other artists, please come and join my free beginner watercolor group on Facebook. And there you're going to experience safe, step-by-step guidance, and you're going to be totally supported and totally without judgment. I'm going to drop the link in the description, and I cannot wait to see you there.